Hey everybody, welcome back to the Badgerland Birding Podcast, bringing you birding news and stories from the Badger State and beyond. Today we're with Ivan Philipsen, who runs the Science of Birds podcast. And it was actually one of our subscribers. We were asking for podcast guest suggestions, and they were like, I love the science birds. You should get Ivan on there. So I was like, got to reach out and see if we can get him. So we're super excited to be talking with you today. How's it going over by you?
It's going really well here in Portland, Oregon. And yeah, thanks guys. Great to be on here with you. I definitely have heard of you guys before. So when you reached out, I was like, all right, cool. Yeah, let's do this. So happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, and first of all, it sounds like you've been doing a ton of traveling. Can you just tell us about some of the cool places you've been and like what some of the highlights were?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so recently I did basically the biggest trip I've ever done, which is a trip in Asia. I hadn't really been in Asia a whole lot until this trip. I lead birding tours, and so this was all part of that. It was work, quote unquote, but of course it was a lot of fun. Part of that was leading a birding tour in Vietnam and Cambodia, and then after that I went to China, Nepal, and Bhutan, and those were scouting trips for future tours, and it was about 2.5 months. And you get into a new part of the world like that, and as a birder or a naturalist, you just get to see so many things that are new and exciting and exotic. And it was just day after day of that, of just not just the birds, but the wildlife and the ecosystems and the cultures, and just everything was really spectacular. So that was, I feel, yeah, really lucky to have gotten to do that. And I put out a few podcast episodes about that trip.
Yeah, when you're out in a place like that, and especially doing a tour, how much is it brushing up on stuff beforehand? And how much of it is like, I've heard this in study, but it's a little different out in the field.
Yeah, I mean, each trip is different. So, if I'm going to just like one country and it's a tour and I'm going to be there a couple weeks and that's the only thing I got going on, then, hopefully I've carved out enough time at home to study and kind of get my brain wrapped around all the different ecosystems, all the way down to the birds and the most common plants and things. On a big trip like that, when it's just like one thing after another, it was really hard to have time to bone up on everything ahead of time. So, I'm always traveling, well, not always, but often traveling with a local guide or a friend or somebody who's more knowledgeable than I am in that place. So I do lean on them heavily, as well as just kind of studying on the fly. Of course, I'm sure like you guys, I've always looked at my Merlin app and eBird and, kind of gathering information, in the car as we're going to the next destination, like what are the most common birds here, and, figuring out what families they're in and all that stuff. So yeah, I love doing that. I wish I had more time to study for any given trip. It's always never enough time. I'm heading to Patagonia in a few days, and, I could use 2 more weeks of study, but hey, here we go.
Yeah, what were some of the highlights? Bird species, and I'm assuming some of the stuff in you said Bhutan and like Nepal,
Mhm.
maybe like some of the big cats out there.
We, interestingly, we didn't have big cats. There were a lot of good mammals on that trip overall. Cats, no. We tried a little bit for what's that guy? The Palace's cat, which is sort
Oh
of
yeah,
famous online. That
yeah,
grumpy
yeah.
looking. We could have seen him in China on the Tibetan Plateau. We did not. We looked one night. We went out in the freezing cold in the dark looking for Tibetan mountain cat, I think it's called. Also struck out. So cats, not so much. We did get wolves. We had red pandas. One-horned Indian rhinos. Like across that trip, lots and lots of great mammals. But we'd have to try a little harder, I think, to get some of the cats. I did see tiger tracks and markings and things. So there were tigers very close, but I didn't actually see any.
Was that disconcerting at all to be in a place where there is an actual real risk of some sort of large predatory animal like that?
Yeah, for sure. With the tigers, I mean, because yeah, they're so stealthy and massive, and you're in their home turf. And I had some local guides with me. It was just me and these two guys, but they were pretty small gentlemen, and they basically each had a stick for their protection. They're like, okay, if a tiger comes, go behind a tree. It's like yeah, okay. I mean, I think I would try that, but it's like, all right, I'm gonna die. But yeah, you just kind of. I mean, you just hope that, it's a rare thing that happens. The rhinos are dangerous too. All those things can be dangerous. So, but you just kind of roll with it. I don't know. I've never really had any really scary situations, thankfully, knock on wood.
Yeah, does that having those encounters, does that check a box for like, yes, we could do tours here? Or is that like, maybe we reconsider
All right.
doing
Pros,
one in this spot?
adrenaline rush. Cons,
Yeah.
potential death.
Yeah.
Yeah, how fast can you run on the registration form for the tour?
Yeah.
Make sure there's always one person who's slower than you.
That's the classic, right? You always got to have one, yeah. Well, so like in Nepal where the tigers were and the rhinos, that particular situation, I was, I was scouting, but I was on foot. And if we were to go, and we did actually have a Nepal tour recently that my friend led for us, we would be in a Jeep, so that's the other way to do it. We'd be in like a Jeep with like 10 people. And most likely you wouldn't have a tiger like jump into the Jeep and start murdering everybody, hopefully not. So I was putting myself in a little more vulnerable situation, just kind of getting the lay of the land. So, yeah, I mean, as I tell folks that come on our tours, safety is always number one, as it probably is on every tour. So we don't take crazy risks like that. We put ourselves out there, but nothing like that.
Yeah, when you do your scouting, what are some of the most important things you look for? Is it more what animals and birds can we find here, or is it more accommodations, how feasible the travel is? What's kind of your one, two, three checklist of what you look for to decide if it's going to be a good tour or not?
That's a really good question. I think, of course, the fun part is going and experiencing the birds and just kind of being a tourist. But really, a proper scout, it's the other stuff you mentioned, which is the sort of logistical things, right? So accommodations, restaurants, bathroom stops. I mean, of all things, that's like
That's like the
super
most
critical.
most important tour thing I've learned
That's
is
what
like
we've
where are the
learned, yes.
bathrooms? Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's just a human thing, right? And between restaurants and bathrooms, that's a lot. That's another good reason in these countries where, I don't speak the language and all that to work with a local guide, because not only do they know the birds and much of the natural history often, if nothing else, they also have the restaurants and that sort of stuff, at least ideas about where to start with that. If it's a destination in the United States, then yeah, it's much more, you know, we don't do local guides in the States. So then I just go and I'm knocking on doors and hotels and talking to restaurants and things like that. So, and that's fun in its own way as well. Yeah. So there's just kind of a mix. But if you just went and looked at the birds and then went home, then you try to lead a tour there, you're going to find you're going to have a lot of issues, so it's good to do your homework when you're there.
Yeah. So let's start talking about the Science of Birds podcast, and let's take it all the way back to the beginning because, doing some research sounds like you have interest in all the different animals, but when did birds really stick out as like, man, this is what I'd like to focus a entire show on?
Yeah. It wasn't, if you go back far enough, it wouldn't have been the thing I would have chosen if you would have asked Ivan when he was 18 years old, 25 years old even, because as a kid I was super into herps. That was my thing, reptiles and amphibians, grew up loving them. Followed that interest into my university education, got a degree in zoology, then a master's in biology studying frogs, PhD also studying frogs. So it wasn't birds, but along the way, I just slowly became a birder, just being around other scientists, other naturalists. Many of them weren't studying birds either, but they were just interested in birds. It was just always that thing, hey, let's go birding, right? You can go hiking, you can go birding. And so it just kind of grew on me. And eventually, when I left academia, the first thing I did was I started doing local tours. And I had a van, I was doing local tours here in Portland, Oregon. And those were not specifically about birds either, but it was everything natural history. And of course, birds would be one of the most prominent vertebrates you're going to see on any given day in any habitat. So that's where my real passion and interest just exploded, because I was doing those tours almost every day through the spring, summer, and fall, seeing all the birds in my local habitats, getting to know their the species, getting to know their behaviors, their calls, their songs, all of that. And so it just kind of sort of took over my psyche at that point. So when it was time to do the podcast, which was, years later, I'd already been doing tours, birding tours and things. So I'd already kind of made that transition to being, all about birds. And then the podcast started when the pandemic happened, when, no one was leading tours anywhere. You couldn't barely leave your house. So I just was like, what do I do? And the podcast was something that kind of been rolling around. I was like, all right, here we go, and it's going to be birds. So I went for it.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's very true about I find that birds are the exact right number of different ones that you can find. Insects, there's too many, so you can get lost in trying to find different insect species. Mammals, there's not enough. Herps, the big problem is that people take them if they find out where they are, so you can't really share locations. Birds are the right mix of accessibility and number of them to be viable as a hobby.
Yes, that's actually a really good way of putting it because, all of those things are great, right? Herps are fascinating, insects are fascinating, mammals are amazing. A lot of people love those various groups, but that's exactly it. The birds, I never thought of it in terms of numbers. That's a good point. Insects can be like overwhelming. So much diversity that, I mean, you can totally get into it, and people do, of course. The other thing is plants, right? So plants, to me, that would be, I mean, it's overwhelming also, but I think that would be the next logical thing because, like, birds are reliable. That's the thing. You go out anywhere and you're going to see at least some birds. Plants, kind of the same thing. You can go out, and the thing is, they can't run away, they can't fly away, so you can take pictures and enjoy them and kind of get into the nitty gritty, So, but yeah, I mean, birds, I think for anyone who's just interested in nature, they are like the perfect vehicle to, or the perfect sort of, I don't know, group to kind of organize your activities around, like we do with our tours. And then you get out there and you've got all the other stuff. And whatever you come across while you're looking for birds, you can enjoy that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have to ask though, what gets you more excited when you see a really cool bird or you see a really cool frog?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I see so few frogs. I mean, even when I go to interesting places like Madagascar or, Vietnam or even Costa Rica, or like you guys have been to Costa Rica. I haven't been to Costa Rica. Ecuador is what I was thinking. Surprisingly, I've seen surprisingly few herps on these trips. So they're exciting because they are unusual. And my little kid heart just kind of goes pitter patter, so I can't help it. But birds, it's like they have definitely dominated my passions. And really, when you stop to think about it, I mean, they're just reptiles, right? They're just weird little dinosaurs. And just because they have feathers, it's like I kind of made that shift a number of years ago, and that just did the whole thing for me. I don't see as much of a distinction as I think I did as a younger person.
Hey, if that's how you need to cope with the fact that you're ignoring all the reptiles, amphibians, then you can do that.
Yeah, I still love you guys.
Trust me, you're
One
all the same thing. I promise. I love you all equally.
I'm not cheating on you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
one thing that I think is great about birds is the rarity aspect. Because you can have this rare bird show up in a place where you can then go see it. We're like, I'm a big fish guy, but it's not often. Hey, there's a rare fish in Lake Michigan that I got to, that's like just one that I'm going to find. So I think
Right.
that's a really cool thing is we talk about it a lot that birding's kind of like Pokemon, where it's like you get to go to these different places and see these different things and you kind of capture it in a photo or a memory instead of a Pokeball. But it just is like feels like the
Absolutely.
perfect adventurous hobby if you want to travel and see different things and find rarities.
Yeah, totally. It seems wrong to say this. I don't know why, but like, yeah, it's like it's a game. You can gamify it, and it's collecting. And humans have an innate, or many of us have an innate desire to collect things, right? Got to collect them all, and birds are perfect for that, And they're. I mean, I was a kid. I loved all. I had action figures and all this stuff, and you get one, you're all excited, and then what's the next shiny, colorful one that you can go out and find, and if it's rare, all the better, or baseball cards or whatever. So, I mean, I don't really think it diminishes it to think of it that way. It's just trying to understand the psychology, yeah, and why people are so passionate about it, why people go crazy for rarities, for listing, for all that. It's that collecting and that game mentality.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's kind of like memory collecting too. So I don't know about you, but for me personally, I like to get a really good experience with the bird. So it's not so much about, oh, there it flew by, let me check it off. It's, oh, I had to travel to this place and I got 30 minutes to spend with this bird doing this thing in this place. And so it's that memory of it that you kind of collect over time as well. And you look at that tick on your stat sheet, then you say, oh, yeah, I remember when we did this or when I had to do that or this or that. There's always a story behind every one. So I want to know, do you have a story like that about a particular bird where that memory of what it took to find it or just something about it really resonates with you?
Oh boy, yeah, great question. And yes, I agree. Like that is, I have on my life list, I know there's probably a good percentage of them where it's like, yeah, I saw that little shadow in the trees and I knew what it was, so it's on the list, but it wasn't, I don't have a strong memory of that. Whereas I love that when I can see the species name and go, ah, yes, I remember the day and the moment I saw that for the first time. That's really cool. So I have a lot of them, and I don't want to dig too deep or too long, but the one that just flashed into my mind, one of my just most enjoyable birding moments was the Magellanic woodpecker, which is one that I'm hoping to see here when I head back to Patagonia. I love woodpeckers in general, as so many people do. It's one of my favorite groups of birds. And many years ago, David Attenborough did a series on birds, and he had this little vignette where he was down in, he's in Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, and he's in this southern birch forest, and he taps on a tree trunk with a rock, does this little double tap, and he calls in these Magellanic woodpeckers. It's kind of the call that they make. So so they come in, and I just thought that was so cool. So it was a bird, I really wanted to see. So we go down there. We're in Tierra del Fuego National Park in this beautiful ancient forest, all these gnarly trees and moss and ferns hanging off of everything. And, we heard that sound of them doing their little double tap on the tree trunks. And my friend and I are like scrabbling up this super steep slope, just, really just out of breath. And within a few minutes, we've got like 10 of these things all around us. They're calling, they're interacting, they're knocking on the trees. We're taking pictures. We're just out of our minds. And it was like, yeah, I was just ecstatic, just totally ecstatic. A bird that if I had to pick maybe 2 birds in Patagonia that I wanted to see, that was one of them. And here I was surrounded by 10 of them. And I was getting photos, and I was like laughing hysterically because it was so awesome, So yeah, I mean, just like, could write a novel, or a series of books about all those moments. I got so many of them.
Yeah, it really speaks to the emotional aspect of it. It elicits so many different emotional responses when you see these different birds, and yeah, it's just such a cool hobby to get those sort of feelings out of it.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, in a good moment like that, it's just pure goodness, right? It's just like this wonderful thing. It's just coming from your heart, and like, yeah, it's just wholesome in all aspects, it makes you feel alive, makes you feel good. And often we're doing it with other people. So it's just this wonderful shared experience. It's really amazing.
It's
Yeah, and
amazing you can find them again too. Like when one is reported somewhere, there's one bird that's reported in this one state, and you can go and find that same bird that is moving around. That is pretty incredible as well.
Yeah, an individual. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Derek?
I was gonna say it's amazing how when you have that experience, it just makes the rest of the day or like the rest of the trip so much better. Because we were in the Saxon Bog and we had one day of birding where it felt like we didn't find anything we wanted to find, and then the next day was like we found everything at once. And early in the day, we got to see a boreal owl, which was like one of our target species. And so like for the rest of the day, I was like, doesn't really matter what happens. We got to see a boreal owl, and you could just keep reminding yourself, you're like, hey, we saw a boreal owl, and it just makes
Totally.
like the rest of the day and the trip that much better.
Well, you can remember that too. And remember that one time we saw the boreal owl?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Made you
totally.
smile.
Yeah, and the thing is, as I've said to people, because we take people on these trips, and there are days where things are kind of quiet and maybe not as exciting. And yeah, you as a tour leader, you really hope that to have at least some of those highs that you can draw upon emotionally. But I tell people like, if every time you went to a particular place, you saw all the birds that were expected there, and it was just like there was no randomness to it, there was no chance. Like what fun would that be, right? There has to be an element of randomness to it because, yeah, that's that again back to that kind of gamification of it. It's there needs to be some uncertainty because then it feels really good when you find the thing.
I like how you
Yeah.
perfected the spin just in case, hey, in case we don't find it, remember, it's always better that you don't get them all.
In that same vein, was there a really crushing miss that you remember, or was like I had one chance to see this bird, we didn't see it, or it was you just missed it kind of deal?
Or for a tour that you had where there was somebody that really wanted to see one and you thought you were going to
Right.
get it and then didn't.
I mean, two things come to mind. One was so I've done trips in Uganda twice, and the first time we went, it wasn't a complete miss, but there's basically one bird that you would put on the brochure cover or the itinerary for Uganda, and that would be the shoebill. Shoebill's an amazing bird, right? So we go to the place that you go to see it, the best place in Uganda, and yeah, we see it, but we see this little tiny dot circling around way, way up high, and catching the thermals, and it's like, yay, shoebill, and you're trying to get every pumped up, you guys, you saw a shoebill, but then we went back the next time, and it's just like, 10 feet away, and it's like blowing your mind. So that was hard. Those kind of things happen. The one that happened more recently was I just did a trip, a Deserts of California trip. So it was kind of focused on birds of the desert, but also kind of desert ecology and stuff. But we did not get a roadrunner. So this was, a bird that I see many times going there. It's not around every corner, but they are fairly common. And so, we went all through these different desert environments, zero roadrunners. And so, it was just kind of like, oh, sorry guys, and it wasn't on the cover of the brochure, but it was definitely, there was a big picture of it in the brochure. So I was like, but it happens. We saw a lot of other cool stuff. So I think that's the thing. As long as you see other sort of, highlight birds or have these major set piece moments that feel really amazing, then, people still go home happy. And the thing is with at least our tours, we try not to attract people who are super hardcore, like Twitcher listers that are going to be really upset if they don't get their, little list of targets or big list. We enjoy traveling with people that are more chill about their birding, that just love birds, love nature, whatever comes is great. Yeah, maybe they're a little disappointed if they don't get the sort of top highlight birds, but they saw all the other cool things that day and they had a good time. And so that makes my job easier. And honestly, it makes the whole thing just a lot more enjoyable.
Definitely. And I feel like having a good group, like if they're, lighthearted and they like having fun, like even if you don't see necessarily everything you wanted to see, you can just have like such a nicer experience, overall with that type of people. So I think that's really true. Diving into kind of the bird biology, is there a common bird that people overlook, but is actually super remarkable when you think about its biology?
Oh, that's an interesting question. A bird that people overlook.
Well, he thinks about that. I always appreciate about woodpeckers with the cushion they have because of their tongue. I mean, that's pretty incredible that when they peck on trees, the tongue actually wraps around the skull, I believe it is, and provides
it does.
cushion for the impact.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, when you see the anatomy of the skull and how the tongue, it kind of splits in two and goes around the back of the head, it's just totally wild. I mean, those guys have so many fascinating adaptations. The thing that came to mind when you asked that question, Derek, is the rock pigeon. I mean, it is kind of a model organism in biology, and so there's a lot we know about it. But I think that bird just gets overlooked, just period, for all kinds of reasons, right? But it's one of those things where, if you, and not that I'm an expert on that species, but just that, like any bird, but if you study its behavior and its anatomy, there'd just be so many fascinating things about it. But that one, I think, just gets written off immediately because of what it is, even though, I know people who have pets and people who've actually paid attention and they see all these amazing behaviors and how intelligent they are and all this kind of stuff, their homing ability, like with the homing pigeons and stuff. So yeah, so I think that would just be one little example of that.
I think that's a good pick. They do often get a bad rep for no reason, basically.
It seems there's a little renaissance, though, about pigeons right now. People are starting to talk about how they're actually a remarkable creature. I think it kind of goes back to the rarity discussion, too, as we overlook a lot of these birds that are just very common. I mean, mallard ducks are everywhere. If mallard ducks were rare and you suddenly saw one with that bright green head on the male, you would think that that's a pretty spectacular bird. But since you can go to the park and you see them eating bread out of people's hand, you don't really think of them that way.
Totally. I've said that exact thing before. And get this. So I just saw in Nepal and Bhutan, Indian peafowl, right? So peacocks for the first time in the wild, but I've grown up around them, and people having them in their yards in California and stuff. It's the most spectacular, ridiculous bird in the world, practically, and yet people just go, "Oh yeah, peacock, whatever." I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like even the people on the tour seeing, these wild ones, they were, I didn't see them getting as excited as I think they would if they'd never seen one before. So yeah, it's a funny behavior, isn't it? Yeah, rarity versus things we're just familiar with. It's just how our brains work, I guess.
There's so much about birding that teaches us about life and humans as a whole.
Totally. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that would be an interesting book, right? What does birding teach us about ourselves? Yeah, because all the human behavior involved in birding the activity and birding tours and all that stuff. Yeah, it's interesting.
Now you
Yeah.
just got me thinking about all this stuff. And we just saw Indian peafowl today because we were at the Milwaukee County Zoo and they have them just running around and they're in the cold temperatures, bathing in the sun today. And yeah, I'm trying to think about what it would even feel like to see one in the wild. I probably would just feel like, oh, there's another one. Can see those anytime I want
That's
to.
how I feel about what I would imagine it would feel like seeing red jungle fowl in the wild, the
Yep.
You mean
chickens.
Yep.
chickens?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
which I
seeing
did.
that
And
wild.
we just saw them. They're like, one was like flying through the forest in China, like, what is that? It's like, it's a red jungle fowl. Like, oh my God, it's flying, 20 feet off the ground. But yeah, and then you realize what it is. You go, oh, well, cool, yeah. But I mean, as much as I try to fight that way of looking at things, I'm guilty of it too, right? I'm way more jazzed about seeing a silver pheasant or some other golden pheasant than I am a red jungle fowl. It's just, even if it's in its natural state, completely undomesticated, and it's a beautiful bird.
Yeah.
You're part of the problem.
I am the problem.
All right. If you could have a conversation with any bird species, which one would you choose and what would you ask?
That's such a fascinating question.
Oh my God, these are the
Back to
kind
the
of questions
red
I need to,
jungle
like,
fowl.
yeah, it's like, yeah, definitely red jungle fowl. No, it's like I need to like go away for an hour and come back and give you an answer. If I could have a conversation with a bird, okay, I got it.
He came up with that fast. I thought that was going to take him a while. He just
Well,
pulled it out of thin air.
Yeah,
His
'cause
heart knows the answer before
my heart
he
knows
does.
the answer. Yeah, exactly. So the northern flicker, I would want to talk to the northern flicker because that bird, at least the ones we have around here, are so dang skittish. Like it's an observation of how you have birds that are kind of bold and curious, and they come up to you, man. Every time a flicker, you just like look sideways at a flicker, and it is just gone, and you just see that white rump patch, and it's out of here. So I would want to talk to it. First of all, just to say, hey, buddy, it's okay. Like, look, I'm your friend. I'm on your side. I am 100% not going to hurt you. And I'm like, why are you so scared? Like, what's the deal? You're not small. You're kind of beefy. You could kind of take some other birds. You could probably take a cat even if you really wanted to. What are you so scared about? Because, and I, as a biologist, the only thing I can think of is that maybe because they forage on the ground a lot and they put themselves in that vulnerable position. So maybe they just need to have that kind of flight response, I should say. Otherwise, it's like, what the heck, man? And not just birds in general. It's like, God, don't you know I love you guys? Like, you don't need to be so scared.
That's something that's very interesting because we were down in Florida, and a lot of the birds in Florida that are skittish where we live are very tame down there. Common gallinule where we live, they're usually hidden in the reeds. They were just out near the boardwalk. There was a purple gallinule that we actually got a top view because it was so close to the boardwalk, you actually had to look over the boardwalk downward to see it.
Wow.
And it's so strange that in some of those places, those birds just seem like humans don't matter to them at all. They're just fine with it. Whereas in other places, they're skittish.
Yeah, so it may not necessarily be genetically programmed into them. Maybe it's more about being habituated, or it's just a learned behavior to some extent for some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Ryan,
Derek,
did you?
what
I was
what?
going to ask you if you had an answer to that.
I was going to
same
ask you
question.
if you had an answer because I think I might talk to a blue jay and be like, "Who do you think you are?
You
Why-
want to teach it a lesson?
Why are you doing this to the other birds? Why are you making that red-shouldered hawk noise?"
Yeah.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah, there was a blue jay the other day that was making the red-shouldered hawk noise at a red-shouldered hawk that was perched, and we were just like, "What are you doing? Are you trying to talk to it?"
But he's trying to do what we're talking about. He's like, if I could talk to another bird species, what would I say?
Yeah.
Maybe cardinals too, and just say, "Hey, stop trying to attack that window. It has nothing to do with you. Leave it alone."
Right?
Yeah, it's true. I feel
Totally.
like you gotta like, do you take it in a conservation way? Like, could I ask the last of like, if there's 10 left of a species, like, hey, can you breed with that one so we can make like
Oh.
repopulate your species
The
or something
night
like
parrots?
that? Yeah, do you take it in that
Yeah.
direction where it's like I got to
you
do
go.
something for the greater good, or do you do something personally, just like ask a boreal owl, like, why are you so adorable, like that kind
Or
of thing?
are you just asking that red jungle fowl, that specific red jungle fowl, something?
Yeah,
totally.
you could take it a lot of different directions.
So what's your answer?
Jeez.
He didn't even think about this. He came in with this question, didn't have an answer.
Well, that's because you could answer it in so many different ways.
I think
I feel
an
like I
interesting
would-
bird would be one of the long distance migrants, such as an Arctic tern.
What have you seen?
Yeah, what have you seen?
Um, I might pick one of those, like, the Grenada Dove or something, and be like, hey, what can we do to help you with conservation? Or like, how can we get you to make more offspring or something like that?
You should
Yeah, that's
probably
a
have a
good call.
conversation with the kakapo, actually. They seem like they're just highly confused about what to do to survive.
They
Yeah.
need a little help, yeah. A little
Yeah.
Yeah.
pep talk.
Ivan, what's been your favorite episode of The Science of Birds to
Mm.
research and produce?
Boy, so I've got like 110 episodes now. Favorite episode. I like some of the longer ones, and it seems like my listeners like those too. It's interesting. I mean, they take more work because, as you guys probably know, I write a script for my episodes, so it takes a fair amount of time. So two of the longer ones come to mind, and one is the one I did on owls, on the family strigidae, which I knew I kind of held out, so I didn't, I could have come out the gate when I started the podcast, doing the kind of, hit the popular, things, the low hanging fruit like owls and stuff. So I waited for a long time and I finally did it. And when I did, it's one of the most popular episodes. And that was just really fun to just dig into that. I think that one's like an hour and a half, which is like way longer than most of my episodes. The other one was seabirds, and I really enjoyed that one because I often do a bird family or an individual species, but every once in a while there's kind of some other way of grouping birds that is logical or the way that people see them. And so yeah, that was just really fun because I haven't done a ton of seabirding myself, and I learned a lot. That's what I love about doing my podcast because it's I as a guide is like, oh, this would be the perfect thing to do because it's going to increase my knowledge. And so it's not just me rattling off stuff that I already know. I do a lot of research for each episode, so when I do something like seabirds, it can be a little intimidating at first, but it's always really cool to dig into all the textbooks and the scientific papers and just get into all that and then try to really get my head around it in a way that I can explain it to other people. Because as you know, teaching others is a great way to learn. So yeah, those were some really, really enjoyable ones.
Yeah, and with that, what is the biggest challenge in taking this highly complex information and making it accessible to everybody?
Yeah, I think, because like, having gone through school for way too many years and getting into all that stuff, I have to remind myself that not everybody can draw upon that pool of information in their brain, right? Even just basic biology sometimes, and so, but but if I just go to completely to basic principles every time I do an episode, I can't just be like, explaining basic chemistry every time or whatever. So there's some level I have to assume about my audience, right? I have to assume, even though I have pretty young kids listening and, people who probably have never taken a biology class in their life. So I think it's the terminology is one of the challenges because there are a lot of these specialized terms. And so I really try to take my time with pronunciation and spelling it out. If it's a weird word, if it starts with a PH, but it's like my name, it has an F sound in the beginning. So I have to spell it out so people can maybe picture it because, there's different kind of learners, right? Visual learners, all that kind of stuff. And then defining things, and then trying to relate them and just not going too fast. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I do a perfect job, but it seems like I've found some kind of balance that works for a lot of people. We're not dumbing it down too much. So we're just talking very surface level. We are getting into the science and we don't shy away from those terms, but it's not just super minutia, tedious, boring stuff either. Hopefully. I mean, maybe sometimes, but hopefully not.
What's kind of
Yeah.
funny about birds too, and especially scientific aspects of birds, is I think that the information is so spread out that a lot of people may not have heard certain aspects of it. Such as there's a lot of bird names that I've not heard said out loud until I started birding. You would read them in a bird book and you wouldn't even know how to pronounce it until you heard someone else say it. So you're kind of pulling all of these bits and pieces from the ether and then putting it together in a coherent thing that people can actually learn from, which is a really fascinating process. It's almost a creative process, or is a creative process more than just
Yeah.
a logical process.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I enjoy about it. And it's one of the things I enjoy about actually writing it out because I enjoy writing so in a way I'm writing kind of an essay and I'm having to really think about the flow of information and the words I'm using and things. And yeah, I think that's the service that I'm providing, right? Is I'm making something that's digestible and I'm drawing from all those different sources, as you say, Ryan, that most people probably aren't going to take the hours of time to do that because they've got busy lives or whatever. But if they can sit down and listen to a podcast episode in an hour and get kind of the gist of it, where it's been crystallized or condensed from other sources, yeah, I think that's something I'm really happy that I can offer.
I always picture it like I don't know if you've seen the Avengers movies or Iron Man specifically, but Tony Stark when he's got that kind of board where he's just pulling stuff from here with automated
Totally.
gloves and everything. That's
I'm
kind of what it's
waiting for
like.
there to be a video editing software where I can just manually pull
Oh,
clips
dude,
and
I
chop
think
them
there
up
is,
and do
but
stuff
you'd
like
have to
that
that.
would
do
be
some
so
work
nice.
on that.
Yeah.
I've experienced kind of what you're talking about, where I've done some videos on how certain birds got to the U.S. or North America, so the house sparrow. So I
Mm-hmm.
was very curious because I knew they were here and someone brought them here, but I had to do a lot of deep research to find out exactly the dates and why and all of that information. And it's interesting to get fragments and then put together a story from it and see, oh yeah, that's how it all connects. It all makes sense now.
Totally. And you stumbled across this in doing research like that, that you have to be careful, right? Because there are facts, quote unquote facts out there on the internet that you see it, and if you just take it at face value and you just put it right into your video or to your podcast, maybe it's true, but maybe not, because oftentimes people just regurgitate. They just see it and they go, cool, I'm going to put that in my blog post, or I'm going to put that in my video, and these things just kind of take on a life of their own. And so, sometimes, and I can't think of a great example right now, but yeah, I try to wear my skeptic's hat. That's one of the things I got from being a scientist is, having that skepticism about information. And so, I hope sometimes to, dispel some of those things, or kind of set the record straight or whatever. But that's tough. That the extra layer of work that you have to do to kind of sift through, and not that you're going to catch all of it, but try to get to the heart of it. That's why I try to go back to the original scientific papers as much as I can, because if you just read like the New York Times article, I mean, that's a good publication. But let's say somebody's blog post, they might have kind of missed the point of a paper or misrepresented it. And then if I just echo that, I'm not really doing anybody any favors.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
one
think
really good historical example actually is the Starling, talking about how Eugene Schieffelin, people think he brought the Starling here because he was a Shakespeare fan. A huge Shakespeare fan was always the narrative. And it was from one somewhat satirical publication where someone said he brought all the birds of Shakespeare to the New World. So people took that as meaning it was his goal specifically to do that, where if you read into it more, the writer seems to just be using it as a figure of speech. So for years now, people have
Perfect.
said a Shakespeare's fan brought starlings here. I don't think it might have had anything to do with Shakespeare at all, but for other reasons. So
I was
that
thinking
stuff has been
about
happening for years.
the
Yeah.
turkey too, with
Oh yeah,
people
yeah.
say that was
Oh,
it Ben Franklin that
the
he
Ben
wanted it
Franklin
to be
thing.
the national bird, but
Yeah,
like he
when he
was
was
actually
actually
just saying
commenting
something
on the
else.
seal of the Cincinnati, and he said that eagle looks more like a turkey, and then in a letter he said, "I wish it just was the turkey. I mean, the turkey's better than the bald eagle anyway." It was never Ben Franklin is petitioning for the turkey to be the national bird. He was just saying, making a joke about how it would be better anyway, because the eagle is a bad moral character. He
Right,
said.
right. Yeah, those are perfect examples, right? And I, was a victim of believing those as well in the past. Like, oh yeah, because you hear that and it just becomes
Why would you
common
not?
knowledge. Why would you not? Unless you dig into the sources. And we're lucky that we often can actually find those sources on the internet, that they're there somewhere. But yeah, so given that we are making things that we're putting out to the public, ideally we're not just perpetuating those quote unquote myths, right? Especially when it comes to things we care about, like birds, or bird biology. Like there was this one, and let's see. So this thing, I'm going to try to remember the bird. There's in one of my episodes, I think, yeah, I made the mistake and I published it. It was like talking about this bird species in Africa that supposedly gets in the mouths of these Nile crocodiles and cleans their teeth or whatever, and that there's this
Like one
kind
of
of
the
symbiotic.
oxpecker species or something
Well,
like that.
it's not that. It's like a plover or something. It's a
Oh,
Egyptian
the
plover.
alligator bird, is it?
Egyptian plover.
Oh,
And
okay.
Okay.
supposedly, I think, and if I remember correctly, and then I totally, regurgitated what I had heard this kind of myth that the birds get in the mouth, and then after I published it and thousands of people are listening to it, I dig a little deeper, and it's like, no, this is not real. And so I think it's been a while, but I think I did like a, the next episode, I'm like, hey guys, sorry,
Yeah.
I messed up,
Yeah, we run into that every once in a while too, and it's the thing that I hate the most when there's something incorrect in the video, or like we'll have accidentally put the wrong title on something, and then you got to make the correction, and I'm like, every video I'm like, this one's gonna be perfect, and then there's always something where
And it's something dumb too. It'll be like a clerical error, like you'll just have the wrong label on a file that gets pulled in or something. But I run into issues sometimes with bird stats. So the maximum velocity of a peregrine falcon, if you look online, you'll find 8 different figures on what exactly it is. So, and you don't even know which to believe because a lot of them will be reputable. But one will have this number, one will have that number. One will say just higher than this, one will say somewhere lower than this, and you don't know which one is the definitive authority on that.
Right. And yeah, that's tough. And what I do is, if I can find an actual, scientific paper in the primary literature where somebody said, we did a wind tunnel or a radar test or whatever, and this is what we came up with, that's what I would want to report. But I know what you're saying. And what I'll often do is just kind of bracket it the best I can, be like, okay, it's from this to this, according to multiple sources. Depends who you ask. Yeah.
You're a man that understands the struggle.
Exactly. I know it. Because you'd want to be able to give something a little more narrow and accurate, but sometimes you just can't. And you wonder. And when I go to the primary literature, and if I can't find any real numbers, then I'm like, well, where did this come from at all? Maybe just somebody just willy-nilly made it up one day, and then everybody was like, yeah, that, and then they just went with it. So.
It could be. And what we're really circling back to is we just need to be able to ask the falcon, hey, how fast can you fly? And this is all connected now. But it is funny how we're getting into the dubiousness of information that's out there in an age where so many people put things out that it's hard to know what's true anymore.
Sure.
I feel like I probably rely too much, but I feel like for everything I'm always like, oh, they often do this, or they normally do this, because I'm like, there's going to be the one time that they don't do that.
Right when somebody says they never do something is when you'll see that bird doing something. We saw a snowy owl in a high tree the other day, and I've never seen one on the tip of a tree before, and sure enough, there it was. So if I told someone that they don't ever sit in high trees, I would have been wrong in that moment.
The very next day, that's where it'll be. Yeah, totally. And I've thought about that too. All the qualifier words that I put in there, and it sounds like I'm just being ever so cautious and tiptoeing around, not making any bold statements. And I just sometimes I feel like you just can't, because there are exceptions, or we just don't know. It's not, again, being skeptical or being a good scientist, you don't put your foot down and say, this is the absolute truth. This is what we think is going on. It's our best guess. It's not, black and white.
I feel like this has been a very cathartic conversation for me personally. So
I know, it's like we're not even talking about birds now. We're just talking about what is truth.
Exactly.
The science communication aspect is really important because the primary literature, to dig through all that, I mean, that can be so mundane. So to have somebody make it fun and accessible, I feel like it's a really valuable quality that I feel like specifically in the bird world right now. Like, I feel like there's more science communication being done with like fish and reptiles and stuff. There's not as much in birds.
Right,
so it feels like
cosmos,
that's very valuable in the bird space, of making it fun. And it's not, because when we were growing up, it was always like, oh, it's a hobby my grandparents do. They sit and watch the bird feeders, and we found it to be this cool adventure. So I feel like birding is kind of undergoing a little bit of a rebranding as, an adventurous hobby, as opposed to like something your grandparents do.
Yeah. Well, that's been great. I mean, good for me as someone who makes a living from birds, but it's just been amazing to see that in my lifetime of exactly what you're talking about, is that renaissance of interest in birds. It's spanning all ages now, right? Because it was very restricted, not just ages, but in, socioeconomic group, that ethnic groups, now it's a much more diverse group of people that are into it. And I mean, I do think that, science communication, it is the right time to be doing that for birds, because so many people are interested in it. And you get, especially young kids, you want them to start off understanding things, hopefully at a reasonable level going forward. And it's not just about, I mean, it can be, but it doesn't it just have to be about, ooh, pretty bird, let me write it down on my list. I don't know anything about it. Let me move on to the next pretty bird. That's cool if that's your thing. I mean, we can enjoy birding at all levels, but yeah, I think, even though, I realized after being in academia for a bunch of years, mostly as a student, but as a postdoc for a little while, I was like, yeah, this is great. Glad I did it. A lot of fun. Not maybe like the best application of my skills and talents. And I think that I feel like I've kind of fallen into it now with science education, which is that I can still think like a scientist. I can use the skills of things like digging through the literature and pulling that kind of information together and synthesizing it, but then giving it back out. And to me, I feel like that's what I can offer, and it feels really good.
Yeah, definitely. Is there like research on a specific bird or bird behavior that hasn't really been done that you would love to see in like the next 5 years?
Hmm. Man, that's a really good question, really insightful question. I guess, a lot of the work I did was as an evolutionary biologist. I did a lot of population genetics, phylogenetics. I'm always kind of defaulting back to those kinds of questions. And there's been so many advances in that, even since I was doing it. In terms of us understanding, for example, how many bird species are there in the world, like for real, or how many families? I mean, a species is kind of a real biological thing. You start to get into families and things, it's a little more abstract, a little more just kind of boxes for us to understand conceptually. But things like hybridization, I mean, there've been a lot of advances, but just where you know where one species stops and one ends, and what all that means. I mean, but I don't think it's something that people aren't studying. I think it's just we're just always learning more. So yeah, I'd have to give that a little more thought. That I know when I'm making these episodes, there'll be things I'll come across, and I will have to say sometimes, like, yeah, ornithologists don't know what's going on here, and they're working on it, but there's still gaps in our knowledge. I mean, it is amazing how much we know and how much we've learned in the last 50 years, but the gaps are getting smaller, but they're still there. So I think yeah, something about hybridization would be what I would say.
Are you more of a lumper or a splitter?
I like how that's types. There's two types of people in this world.
Well, I've been asked that same question. Yeah, it's a real question. I'm very much a splitter. If the data says it, that it makes sense to do so. I guess I know there's part of it's an emotional thing. Part of it's just, I could just trace that into my brain where it's like, yeah, I just like diversity and I like there to be more things.
Red poles, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the red bulls. I know, what a bummer, man. Yes. Well, like or like the yellow-rumped warblers. Let's split them. Let's lump them. Well, it's like,
Split them. Split them.
yeah,
Let's
split
do it.
them. Yeah, yeah. So
You could see the pain when
yeah.
you said red poles. Like that just hit him. That
Oh
seemed
yeah.
personal. Yeah.
I mean,
Having to
because
find a
That's
hoary
a
red
guy that's
pole.
seen a hoary
yeah,
red pole and got to
that's the
take it
thing. I've
away.
seen some of these things, and now it's like, don't take it away. But it is, as a scientist, it is fascinating, and it is interesting. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that when you have these phenotypically, these physically very distinct things that apparently at the genetic level are still operating as species. And so then it's like, "Ooh, okay, what's going on there? It's maybe just a few little genes that are causing these differences, or what's maintaining those morphs, or whatever it is." It's just fascinating questions. So yeah, so I'm a splitter, but yeah, only if the data says, nah, man, like if the red bulls. I haven't looked at that paper. I haven't dug into that
Sounds like a
myself.
new episode to me.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm about to do one on crossbills, and that's
Ooh.
that's very crossbill adjacent. So I might talk about
Uh,
red bulls a little bit.
Getting in the weeds there. What's funny too is somebody told me at some point that it was mostly one person's research that led to the red poles being split, but that paper wasn't even used very much in the recent decision or something.
Mm.
And this is all stuff I can't verify. So going back to, hearsay based on something where you don't even know what to believe. But it also kind of reminds me of the book that Ken Kaufman wrote about what's it called, Derek? The Birds that Audubon
The
Missed.
birds that Audubon missed.
Birds that Audubon missed, how it was kind of an arms race to categorize species and create different species, and some may have been forgotten and missed, and some may have been added that weren't actually real. So science has always had this element of shadowiness around it, where you don't know what the truth really is always. And even though we like to believe that that's not happening anymore, I think it still is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is getting better, but and there may never be an endpoint, right? It might be the kind of thing. I mean, as I often say in the podcast, nature is messy, and nature isn't always clear cut, and it may be that we never know really how many bird species there are, or whether a couple of these birds that we're looking at truly are different species or not, and maybe they're somewhere in between, and there's a lot of gray areas. So, yeah, I mean, I feel lucky to be alive in the time we're in terms of understanding biodiversity, not just of birds, but of everything. Like, I really like the idea of understanding the world as much as possible while I'm here alive on Earth. And so it feels like we live in a good time for that. Of course, we don't know. Maybe it felt good to be, living in Audubon's time. Maybe like, wow, we know everything there is to know about birds.
Probably.
We got it. We're done.
I just shot this one. We're good.
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot 5 more.
Yeah, there's like, 1,000 birds in the world, and that's what we got. But anyway, so I don't know. I think there'll be interesting things to come, but there's, they see it as kind of an asymptote, right, in terms of our knowledge of, at least of bird diversity. It's like it shot up rapidly in the last 150 years or whatever, and now we're just teasing apart these little tiny differences and lumping and splitting, and I think now that we've got 11,000 plus species, I don't anticipate that in our lifetimes it's gonna be like 20,000 or something at some point. There was a paper a few years ago that tried to make an argument for there being like 20,000 bird species, and I can't remember what the basis for that was, but I think we're getting close to
a heavy splitter. Was just
split them all.
Yeah. There's got to be at least two for each of these. Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing more of the Eurasian split, so now we're getting, American herring gull and things like that, and American barn owl. So there is a potential to do that with more on a regional basis. If they ever do decide that, barn owls in the Southwest of the United States are different than those in the North, they could make a split there. So
yeah, I mean, it will. I'm sure will continue. I mean, there was just there was a sunbird. I think it was the olive sunbird. Like a couple years ago, got split into like 8 or 9 species or something. So that kind of stuff can rapidly increase the number of species. But then there also might be lumping. It seems like splitting will be more likely because what those are, of course, are species that look the same outwardly to our eyes. But then when you do the genetics and you listen for their sounds, and you realize now these things aren't interbreeding. I think that's more common than things going the other way. But yeah, I don't know. I think we're getting there. We're getting close, hopefully.
You got me thinking about juncos. Juncos look so different based on region.
Yeah. And again, not having read any papers about their genetics so much, it just seems like that would be a natural one to consider splitting, but maybe
notorious splitter Ivan Philipsen.
Yeah. See, that's what I mean. Yeah. Just reckless. Out of control. He's
the guy that wrote the paper that said 20,000 species. I don't remember who wrote it.
Some guy wrote one.
Yeah, it was brilliantly argument. You should read it. Really, it's really good.
Everyone should read it and abide by it. Don't remember the author's name.
Yeah. I can't remember. Very handsome. He was very handsome.
As a birder, it really frustrates me when they make those splits and the species look identical. Because then you're like out in the field, I'm gonna like.
Right.
I mean, even Carolina chickadee and black-capped. Like some people claim they can tell the difference, but it's really just range.
And
so if you're on the line, you're just kind of like, screwed,
Did those two? Their calls must be a little different. I would imagine. I mean,
they're a little different.
But I feel like if the Carolina slipped into Wisconsin, nobody would know.
Well, also, there's accents. Humans have regional dialects.
Right. Yeah,
why not
so
just
it's
birds?
like, well, they do. Like cardinals in the south sound different than cardinals in the north. So, but that frustrates me when there's a split that then makes an immediate ID difficulty.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, that is because that's what's interesting too. Because the question is, okay, so there are two things we're looking at. We're looking at our species' real biological things, which I think most biologists would agree that, yes, there's some biological truth there. Some things interbreed, some don't, even though there's gray area. Then there's what is helpful to us as we categorize the world and catalog it. And so that's not helpful to us, when two things look identical and we literally can't tell them apart, even though we know somebody told us they are. So yeah, you're trying to, I mean, because there's taxonomy and then there's the actual phylogeny. So the naming of things versus the actual evolutionary relationships. And you're trying to pair those up in a beautiful way. And if it's just only good for scientists, that's the question. Is that good enough? Because you want it to be accessible.
Yeah, and then you have stuff like Cooper's hawk getting moved into the Aster genus when it looks so similar to sharp-shinned hawk, and somebody's
Right.
telling you, no, these things aren't as closely related. And you're like, they look so similar. Like it kind
Totally.
of
I
just
can't even tell them
confounds you.
apart. How can they not be
Yeah. Hairy
And then
related?
people
woodpecker
are
and
like, I
downy
can't put
woodpecker. Yeah.
accipiter species on my checklist anymore. So you just,
Yeah.
I feel like as a kid, everything feels so concrete. You look in the bird book, you're like, oh, this lives here and it eats this and it does this. And then as an adult, like everything changes and you're like, my world is shaking. I don't know what to believe
I
anymore.
know.
I have an
I
idea
mean,
for a
yeah.
drama movie for birders that's called Lumped, where one day they put every species together in one that's just called bird species.
Everybody's list just says bird species,
Yeah, I've been
10,000.
trying to workshop this, and like I'm picturing a scene where someone's life list is, 700, and then the next day it's whittled down to one. It just says one bird
Yeah, they just wake
species.
up and they like check. Oh no,
Yeah, and I was
I'm the
trying to think
top
of
birder in the world.
but so was
we're all the
everyone
top birder
else.
in the world.
I was thinking about why would they do this, and I came up with an idea that they wanted to develop land everywhere or something, so then there's no more endangered birds because they're all just bird.
Oh
I think I
yeah, it's
really
just
have
bird.
something here, Ivan. You don't steal it from me.
Okay, all right, all right. I'll sign a non-disclosure agreement or whatever that's called.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah. I mean, so the thing with like people renaming things, it's like, so I mean, we could get into it, but there's the whole, the bird names for birds and the eponymous names, right? And the changes that are proposed to get rid of all the eponymous bird names. But and seeing people's reactions to that, and some of that, it does seem to come from the place of like, I learned it this way, and I'm so proud of myself for spending, decades of my life learning all my birds and their names, and now you're going to tell me that a whole bunch of them are going to change, or even just one or two are going to change. And people, yeah, they really get upset about that. And I mean, I'm laughing just because I don't know. I mean, to me, I embrace it. I don't know, just I know it's just me, but it's just like, hey, man, like if that's what the science says, and that I mean that the eponymous thing is not that's a cultural thing, but yeah, like when I was studying a tree frog for my master's, it was the California tree frog. The scientific name changed halfway through the time I was working on my master's, and I liked the old one better. It sounded better. It had a rolled off the tongue. The new one was like, eh. But I just said, cool, man. That's what the science says. So I'm not gonna like throw a fit about it.
I pictured you being halfway and just being like, my paper. Like I gotta find and replace every
It would be
single
funny if
one.
they like wouldn't
Yeah,
let you change it, so then they just kept commenting on how your work was wrong. Like
yeah. They're
halfway
like,
through you can't change it, you have to call that. I think
yeah.
with that it's just whatever it is when it became important to people,
Hmm.
hearing that change is a negative impact for many humans.
Sure.
Like one of our friends, I don't know how she feels about it one way or another, but she loves Lawrence's goldfinches. She has a Lawrence's
Hmm.
goldfinch tattoo.
Hmm.
I don't think it says Lawrence's goldfinch on it, but imagine if somebody has it says Lawrence's goldfinch, and then all of a sudden that name changes. That's
Right.
like a part of you that suddenly is not there anymore because of a name change for whatever reason. So I don't know.
When
Yeah.
when
It's
I
an
was
interesting
in
topic.
when I was in Costa Rica, there was a lot of stuff where it was like, oh, this was this, and then it split,
Hmm.
and then they lumped it again, and then they
Hmm.
split it again, or
Well, it's amazing how
it
much
seems like
some of these
that
names have
stuff
already
changes a
changed.
lot.
Because you'll
Yeah.
hear about some bird that,
Solitary Vireo is one I
yeah,
heard
or
that
like
dude had.
wasn't Harris's hawk Rufus winged hawk, and then
I don't know about that
and
one.
then they changed it
Rufus-sided
at some
towhee,
point.
you hear
Yeah,
sometimes.
Rufus-eyed
Yeah.
towhee,
Yeah.
eastern
Totally.
towhee. So stuff is constantly changing. That can be frustrating just from the
Hmm.
perspective of now I have to remember to call it is it a northern
Hmm.
house wren, American herring
Well,
gull,
Right.
so
western cattle
the one
egret?
that bothered me was they changed Northern Goshawk to American Goshawk. And to me, it went from fierce to now just reminds me of American cheese. Feels like a discount brand Goshawk. So in my mind, I'm like, it's this fierce
The
predator that
fierce
lives
northern
in the
From
north.
the
goshawk.
And now I'm
north.
like,
Yeah.
it's a cheese whiz,
So it went from like
discount
northern
bird.
goshawk patrolling the boreal forest to American goshawk hanging out in McDonald's parking lot.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I mean, names are powerful. Yeah, I mean, totally, I get that. And yeah, some of those that you mentioned, I mean, yeah, like that happened to me too. Took ornithology many, many years ago, and that things have changed. But yeah, I don't know. I just think, I mean, people are allowed to react however they want. I just think, we don't all have to react negatively. I don't know. It's just like, because most of the time, I mean, we're trying to do the right thing, right? These names they're trying to either match what we understand about biology, or maybe in some cases get rid of a name that's offensive or whatever. And, it's all trying to move in a good direction. It's not like, let's just do this because it's going to mess people up. It's like, I don't know. And so
That
when people
Ivan's getting too comfortable over there.
yeah, like we gotta keep on his toes.
Let me ask you
because
this, Ivan.
yeah, yeah.
Red-bellied woodpecker. Should we try to change it?
Because the belly's not that red.
Yeah, it's not that red.
It's not
Sometimes
like
it's a little red.
It's just kind of like pinkish, like
Yeah.
wash, like a little wash.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing too, right? So some of these names, or well, like the famous one, right? Ringneck duck.
yeah.
I mean, it's just like I was just
Kinda
showing
got
people
a
the other
ring.
day, and it's like it's almost you almost never see that subtle iridescence on the neck, but the ring-billed duck would be
Yeah.
great. So it's like there's back to that question of what are these names for, and are they meant to be helpful for birders or descriptive or what? So yeah, man, I would be open to changing some of those names as well, but
If regardless of like, meaning or backlash or whatever, if you could just rename one, do you have one in mind that you would right away? You're just like, that one's gone. Should be this
the
instead.
duck, I think. I mean, because so many times
It's
I have to
gotten
go
me
through that.
so many times.
I just have to like, I mean, but just because it's like, because you in the same pond you might have like lesser scop, and if you go see that one, look at its bill, it's got this little, and if you just say that's called the ring-billed duck, like oh yeah, it's like everybody would get it, but you're like it's a ring-neck duck, and they're like, well, I don't see a ring on its neck. It's like, well, the guy who named it had a dead one in his hands, and he could see like a subtle iridescence. It's like, that's not helpful to anybody. But
What about like purple sandpiper too? That's one where, it's
It's got
kind
a
of
purple
purplish.
sheen. Like,
Yeah, but we're talking
yeah,
about the sheen here. We're talking about the
yeah,
sheen. I think what we need to do is we need to rename every single bird by just having a photo of it and showing it to approximately 8 6-year-old children.
oh
And then
dude, that'd
whatever
be great.
they decide to call it, that's what we roll with.
There you go. That's pretty brilliant. Yeah.
I
then
know, right?
you'd have names like Iron Man and like Goofy and just random
You'd
stuff
have
like
names
that.
like
Yeah.
Red Jungle Fowl.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, or we give them all barcodes. They could just have like a 6 7 digit
I saw
number, and
bird
that's just
018245 today.
just
That's
take
so
all
dystopian.
emotion out of it. Yeah, yeah, totally right. They just give them all barcodes, just scan them. Yeah, yeah, it's that.
There's
That's
an
it.
analogy for listers there somewhere. Bird number 22. Bird
Six
Oh
number
eight
yeah.
four three
23.
is so majestic.
Well, we talk about it's funny when people try to make a bird like, I want this one to be my 100th species, and then something gets lumped or split, and then it bumps it out of that spot.
The house
Right.
sparrow.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, something mundane. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I guess, how are you guys on, what's your sort of approach to listing and all that? Do you guys go super deep into like the county listing and all that, or at all?
I think like lifeless is my most important thing, but I really like having a good experience with that bird.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think it's more valuable if I can spend, 30 minutes seeing a new bird than getting 5 new ones where you have maybe like a minute with each one. So I feel like we like slowly kind of listing, but it's more about, well, we make the videos now, so it's almost more about getting the experience for the video is more important. And we
Nice.
have this funny thing where it's kind of like if one of us sees it, we can make it for the channel, so it feels less important for the other one to go see it. Like there have been several rare birds in Wisconsin that I've seen that Ryan drags his feet on and takes 5 days or whatever to make the trip out to go see it because he's like, "You saw it, so I don't need to." So we had like flame-colored tanager in the state, which is just
Nice.
wild. And he took like 5 days and eventually got it. But he's like, you've seen it. I feel like I've already seen it. You can make the video about
That's
it. It's
interesting.
I
fine.
also
Yeah.
have to say, traveling absolutely ruined my state list because now there's things that show up in Wisconsin like sage thrasher, where I've seen a sage thrasher in Oregon in its natural habitat in the scrub, in basically the desert. And so it doesn't feel very important to go see it when it shows up in someone's backyard out of place. So
Right.
traveling in a weird way made me less interested in going to collect ticks for my county or state.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess if you imagine the extreme of that, somebody who never left their state, or just their county or whatever, then they would be really excited about anything unusual that would come in, because that's the only way you're ever going to get those birds. Yeah, if you travel a bit, it's like, because that's, I mean, personally, I maybe you guys feel similar, but I love seeing birds in their sort of natural habitat, even though vagrancy is an interesting biological phenomenon, and I look forward to doing a whole episode on that on the podcast. But I don't chase a lot for that reason, just because I'm like, yeah, it's cool. It's like, a bird that's kind of little, lost or whatever, and that's neat, but I'm not going to freak out. That said, I'm still kicking myself for not going to see the snowy owls the last time they were in Oregon. And I was just like, yeah, they'll be back. It's like nope, not since then. So
we got them in Wisconsin right now, Ivan. If you want to come see them,
all right, gotta get on a plane, yeah, man, because that, so yeah, it's definitely worth it. But yeah, no, that sounds like a great approach to birding, like, or to listening to just things that you really remember well and you had a good experience with and all that, and because it's like, because I say that I'm not a big lister, and I don't want to. Yeah, it's not all about the list. The list is sort of secondary. I enjoy using eBird, and I enjoy doing citizen science and contributing data and all that. I love data, just period. So it's great. But it's like if I didn't know that that's the bird for sure, and I didn't usually sometimes I'll put something I heard only, because it's like, yeah, I'm never ever going to see that bird, but it was right there in that bush. I know I was there, so I'll put it on there. But yeah, it's always just interesting to see how people approach their life list.
Yeah, it's kind of almost a bummer sometimes if you see something you want to see but don't get a good look at it, or it's not that great of an experience. When we were down in Florida, we saw a gray-headed swamp hen at Lake Popka area, and the first look was pretty distant. So they were way off in the opposite shoreline, basically, kind of like little purple dots. And it was like, oh, we got them, but that's not that great. And then later they were standing on the road really close to us, and suddenly the experience went from, oh yeah, it was okay, to, wow, that was crazy, we got to see that life bird so close.
So much better.
Yeah, so much better.
Go
ahead, Derek.
Something that we talk about is when you see a vagrant bird, the sad truth is a lot of the times they're sick or lost, or you don't really know what the fate is going to be. Specifically with a lot of those Arctic gulls, like the Ross's gulls and the ivory gulls, where we were saying it's even kind of sad when you go see it, because it's probably not going to make it. And they had one, I think it was a Ross's gull in Kansas, and it was like eating the remains of a dead Ross's goose that had died, presumably to avian flu. Snow goose.
It wasn't a Ross's on Ross's issue.
Yeah, that would have been rough.
Ross, I can eat you too.
But and that bird died shortly after that. So even going to see it and just knowing that it didn't make it is kind of sad. Like, we always like to think that they make it back to wherever they're from, but there normally is something going on. There's a reason
something's going on.
A place they're not supposed to be.
Yeah, something's a little tweaked in their brains or whatever it is. Like you say, maybe they're sick. And I think that's another reason why it's like I'm a little less jazzed about that, about going and seeing something, because it just feels a little off, because it is, but interesting.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, would you rather see a really rare bird in a place that's never been, or in their natural habitat? I think I know the answer to that.
You know the answer, yeah. I mean, because to me it's like, and again, it's not to discount the reality of vagrancy as something that has been important, right? Because the way I think about it is like, okay, the Hawaiian Islands, right? Basically the most isolated archipelago in the world, populated by birds, colonized by birds. There had to be vagrant birds that got out there at some point that got blown off course and ended up where they weren't supposed to be. So it's a biologically powerful thing, or can be. But in terms of, I just like seabirds, in their natural habitat, because then it's like, okay, where do they nest and what do they eat and what are their seasonal patterns? And you can, when you're in their natural habitat, you can really kind of get that bigger picture and kind of imagine it or experience it. So it's pretty neat.
One thing that's fascinating to go along with that too is birds that naturalize in areas. So down in Florida, the spot-breasted orioles naturalize there, the swamp hens naturalize there. So you're getting a bird that wasn't originally from there, that now it is their kind of natural habitat in a weird way. And in more extreme example, cattle egrets in the New World in general.
Totally. Yeah, we've got up here, we have Anna's hummingbirds and California scrub jays and things that have been moving north with people, but also as things warm up and, for a variety of reasons. So, I mean, there's kind of those natural colonization. Things are always kind of shifting and moving around. Of course, when you throw people in the mix, it's a whole new variable. But yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating as well. It totally is.
You have some barred owl issues up there too.
We do. Well, we have some issues. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because they're, beating the heck out of our little spotted owls. So now the government is going to try to, I don't know how far along they are with this, or they've even started. I got to check again, but they were going to kill, I don't know, like 30,000 barred owls or something was the plan. Yeah. So, it's like, there's a mess for you, right? It's like, you've got, yeah.
We had a funny comment on it. Well, it's funny, but also sad in a tragic way. Somebody said they were doing spotted owl surveys, and they said one of the craziest birds they ever saw was a spotted barred owl hybrid, and they said it mated with 2 or 3 spotted owl females. They were like, that thing was an absolute stud, and I was just like, that was not good for the gene pool at all.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like that might be one of the only ways out, though, too, right? Would just be like blending together into some new weird thing that can survive,
Hybrids,
I don't
man.
know. Yeah, hybrids. I mean, sometimes that's what it is, right? I mean, the hybrid vigor, they call it, so oftentimes hybrids have lower fitness, and that's what maintains the species as separate. But if the hybrids have more fitness, then boom, sometimes that really speeds up the whole process.
Yeah. All right, Ivan, I have one more question for you.
Sure, man.
If you could introduce one bird species to someone in order to spark a lifelong love of birds, which one would it be? So if you could present someone with one and tell them about it and be like, look at this thing, what species are you picking?
Oh my gosh. That is a good question and a tough question. Jungle fowl, yeah. Let me see. I'm a sucker for colorful birds. I'm just thinking like, an average person who isn't into birds have to be really jazzy. Man, I'm kind of thinking a pheasant. I mean, not a jungle fowl, but just having traveled in Asia, some of these pheasants are so just insane. And the one that I saw really well, so there's some that are there I just didn't get to see really well, was the blood pheasant. And it's like, I don't know if you guys know what that looks like, but it's just this kind of chunky, kind of chicken-shaped bird, but the male has this kind of blood red skin on the face and on the feathers, but there's also like lime green mixed in there and like white, and it's just like totally ridiculous. And something like that. Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. That thing is crazy.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, and that's not, there are plenty crazier pheasants, but just something like that with just like this outlandish combination of colors that makes weird noises. And I mean, we were seeing these things at like 11,000 feet up on the Tibetan plateau and super freezing conditions, and there would be like 30 or 40 of them. And they're just amazing, So yeah, without giving it too much thought, I think something like that. Like you say, if you just like literally hold it in your hands and go, here, look at this, and put it in their face. Isn't that amazing? You're a birder now.
That's how it feels like it goes sometimes,
I mean, sometimes it's all it takes. Who knows whatever happened with this lady, but one time I was doing a local tour here out on the Oregon coast, and I always think of her when I think of being able to do that for somebody. I had a scope, and she never looked through a scope, and there was a Pacific wren, and it was singing on just a little stump, maybe 40 feet away, 50 feet away. I put the scope on it, and she looked through the scope, and she was just like, oh my God, just like, because all the detail she could see it as it's singing. You could just tell it just blew her mind, and I don't expect she's a birder, but it's like those kind of moments can literally change someone's life potentially. So it's a real thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, people can check out the Science of Birds podcast on all the podcast platforms. And you also have a Patreon page as well if people want even more, correct?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's, I'm able to get some support through that, which is really awesome. And I've got a lot of great listeners, and I just feel really lucky that people enjoy listening to the way I present stuff about birds.
Well, cool. Thanks so much for all you do, Ivan. Appreciate the work, and thanks to everyone for watching and listening to this episode of the Badgerland Birding Podcast.